I'll put together a national commission bipartisan commission of scholars, constitutional scholars, Democrats, Republicans, liberal, conservative, and I will ask them to, over 180 days, come back to me with recommendations as to how to reform the court system, because it's getting out of whack.
The Supreme Court of the United States holds immense power over the country's laws, shaping everything from voting rights to healthcare and personal freedoms. With the court's recent conservative shift, discussions of reform have intensified. But how feasible is President Biden's plan for Supreme Court reform? Can it truly reshape the judicial system, or is it just political theater? Let's break it down. Judicial reform has long been a contentious issue in American politics. With a 6-3 conservative majority on the bench, many Democrats and progressives have pushed for changes to the Supreme Court structure to balance what they see as a tilted judiciary. President Joe Biden formed a commission to explore potential reforms, but his administration has yet to fully embrace any radical changes. The debate over reforming the court raises critical questions. Should justices have term limits? Should the court expand? And most importantly, does Biden actually have a viable path to make any of these changes happen? In this video, we'll analyze Biden's stance on Supreme Court reform, break down the proposed changes, and discuss the likelihood of these reforms actually taking place. Biden's stance on Supreme Court reform.
Extremism is undermining the public confidence in the court's decisions.
Biden has historically been skeptical of extreme Supreme Court reforms, including court packing. However, under pressure from progressive voices within the Democratic Party, he created the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court of the United States in 2021. The commission was tasked with evaluating various reform proposals, but it ultimately failed to provide strong recommendations. Instead, it delivered an in-depth analysis of different ideas without endorsing any specific course of action. Biden himself has not explicitly pushed for expansion or term limits, making his position somewhat ambiguous. This cautious approach has left many wondering if meaningful reform is even on the table. Supreme Court expansion, is it realistic? One of the most debated proposals is expanding the number of justices. The Constitution does not set a specific number of Supreme Court justices, and historically, Congress has adjusted the number several times. However, the court has remained at 9 justices since 1869. Expanding the court is viewed by many progressives as a necessary step to counteract what they perceive as a conservative-dominated bench. Supporters argue that increasing the number of justices would create a more balanced and fair judiciary. However, critics caution that expanding the court could set a dangerous precedent where future administrations continue to add justices whenever they gain power, turning the Supreme Court into a partisan battleground. Since expanding the court requires congressional approval, and with a divided Senate, this proposal faces major political roadblocks. Even within the Democratic Party, moderates like Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema have expressed opposition, making this option highly unlikely in the near future. Term limits for justices, a more viable reform. Unlike expansion, term limits for Supreme Court justices seem to have more bipartisan appeal. Currently, justices serve for life, which means a single appointment can shape decades of legal decisions. Some proposals suggest an 18-year staggered term limit, ensuring that each president gets at least one appointment every 2 years. This would prevent long-term partisan control of the court and maintain a steady turnover of justices. Another idea is requiring justices to rotate to lower courts after their term expires, preventing lifetime dominance over constitutional law. While term limits are a more measured approach, the difficulty lies in passing the necessary legislation or amending the Constitution, both of which require significant political will. If Congress were to pursue this reform, it could face legal challenges that would likely be decided by the Supreme Court itself, an ironic obstacle to the reform effort. Ethics and transparency reforms, the most achievable option. Another area of reform focuses on ethics and transparency. Recent controversies involving justices receiving undisclosed gifts and having potential conflicts of interest have fueled calls for a Supreme Court ethics code. A formal ethics code would hold Supreme Court justices to similar standards as lower court judges, preventing potential conflicts of interest. The political reality. Can Biden deliver? Despite growing calls for change, the political reality remains challenging. Any significant reform requires passing legislation, which is difficult in a polarized Congress. Even among Democrats, there is no consensus on the best approach. Public opinion on Supreme Court reform is also divided, with many Americans wary of drastic changes that could politicize the judiciary further. Another obstacle is the Supreme Court itself. Any legislative reform affecting the court's structure could be challenged and potentially struck down by the very institution it seeks to reform. The court's conservative majority would likely scrutinize any effort to impose term limits or adjust the number of justices, making it difficult for reforms to take effect without a constitutional amendment. With Biden's term nearing its end and the 2024 elections approaching, any serious effort at reform would require a major political shift. If Republicans regain control of Congress or the White House, reform efforts would likely stall completely. The impact of public opinion on Supreme Court reform. Public opinion plays a crucial role in shaping political decisions, and Supreme Court reform is no exception. While some Americans strongly support changes to the court, others view such proposals as a dangerous overreach. Polls indicate that a significant portion of the population is skeptical of court expansion, fearing that it would erode judicial independence. However, there is greater support for term limits and ethics reforms, particularly among younger voters. If the Biden administration wants to push for any changes, it will need to build stronger public consensus. Grassroots activism and advocacy groups have started raising awareness about the need for reform, but without widespread public backing, Congress is unlikely to take bold action. This makes public perception a key battleground in the fight for judicial changes. So how realistic is Biden's Supreme Court reform plan? The answer is, it depends on the type of reform. Court expansion seems highly unlikely given the political landscape. Term limits, while more viable, face significant legal and legislative obstacles. Ethics reforms, however, stand the best chance of implementation as they have broader bipartisan support. Ultimately, unless there is a seismic political shift, drastic changes to the Supreme Court remain improbable. But the debate is far from over. What do you think? Should the Supreme Court be reformed? Should justices have term limits? Should the court expand? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more in-depth political analysis. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.